Hey there. Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome to the first live session for our Celtic Bust Paint-Along. Happy to have you here. I know that people will still be trickling in for the first couple minutes. We just got the announcements out there that we were live. So I'm going to kill time for just a couple minutes, fill you in on some things that are happening, talk to you about what the plan is, and then we'll get into painting some miniatures. Hey, Mr. Heath, it's good to see you. I meant to shake up all the paints I planned to use today in my paint shaker. This will have a little bit of annoying background noise, but that's okay. It's been a busy few weeks work-wise for me. Summers are always crazy. This is, we do a lot of providing curriculum for schools. We do teacher training. We do a lot of things like that, and so this is always a busy time with print deadlines for the next school year coming up, and then working with hey, Suliko, what's up? Working with teachers who are off school, and so they have the free time to do the professional development right now. So we did a math camp for kids here locally. So we had a busy couple weeks. Just these last few days, I was attending a conference that was actually here in town. The TOTOS conference, which is the Mathematics for All group, where they do a lot of work with equity and access for underrepresented populations in math and STEM fields. So I went to that conference, went to a lot of sessions that were really great. I did a presentation on Saturday morning with one of my colleagues from New Jersey. So we were working on, sharing some of our work and helping people see how the things that we do might be able to help those populations of students. So it was a really good weekend. My friend was here staying, took her to the airport this morning. So it's just been busy. I have also been busily painting away. I'll show those in a second, the sample busts. So I kind of wanted to do one run through, get all the colors set, get the techniques down of exactly what how I wanted these busts to turn out, see if I needed to tweak anything for the stream and stuff like that. So I have William Wallace all painted up. Hamish, I still have a few things to finish on him, but nothing that's what we're going to work on today. So I'll have him fully painted before we get to the parts that are unpainted on him. In the meantime, if you still are joining us, you haven't ordered a bust, you can still do so. You can go to my website, gorillawithbrush.com. There's a link up at the top, Celtic Busts. You can still order a pair, get started. These streams will be saved on Twitch for 30 to 60 days, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then I'm also going to archive each stream and upload it to YouTube within a couple days of the live stream. So everything will be archived. You can always catch up. Also, for those of you who are out there and painting along, again, you can go back and watch those videos. So a couple things that you might want to think about as you're working on these. So many of you who wanted to participate bought both busts. Some of you only bought one of them. If you bought both of them, what you might want to do is paint one of them along with me. And then once the entire process is done, try to paint the second one using what you learned during the first process. Use it as like a second trial run. You can always go back and rewatch the videos. So I think that would be a really good idea. Which one you want to do first, it's up to you. That would be my suggestion if you have two of the busts. I'm going to paint both of them at the same time, I decided. And the reason being is I think it would be kind of nice if while I'm painting one of the busts, you can just sort of watch, you can see what I do, and then when I switch over to the other bust to do the same color, then you grab your paintbrush and you paint along with me with the second one. That's kind of how I think. I'm always open to feedback. Again, I'm doing this as kind of just a paint-along to paint with you guys, to help you guys out, learn some techniques that might be new to you, push your skills, try something new. But give me feedback. If there's something that you would like me to do while we're streaming, let me know and I can change it for the next time. Some of the things that would be kind of cool is you can send in your works in progress pictures. So show me what you actually achieved in your last painting. We can share some of those on stream and see how everybody's doing, give some feedback. Feel free to ask questions as we're streaming, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, today I'm also going to tell some stories because I spent some time in Scotland. So I'll tell some stories about my time there as it pertains to the movie Braveheart and Celtic busts and things like that. Let me show you what we're at. So this is the William Wallace figure. He's basically done. Let me pop these up real fast. That's a good idea, Mr. Heath. Well, you have a suggestion for one? So I'm just going to show you the reference pictures that I used as I was painting them, just so you can kind of get an idea of where I was getting the colors from. So that was one of the reference pictures I used. This is the other reference picture I was using. This one was more for some of the tone in the face and also the tartan. This was the best view of the pattern and the texture that was in the tartan. So yeah, I also kind of realize every so often he's got a vertical bar. It shows, you can't see my finger where I'm pointing. I'll use this finger. It kind of shows in the horizontal side. There's a little bit of dark, or is that just a shadow? It's hard to say. You don't really see the ones going perpendicular to the stripes too often. Oh well, I didn't do any of those when I painted this guy. So anyway, those were the reference pictures I used for him. He's basically done. I debated back and forth about two things. First, the actor has stubble in really both pictures. So I debated doing stubble on this bust. However, I think that that's maybe one step too far in doing this. I think that the level of detail we have on this is already going to be nice and challenging and push us. So I decided not to do that for this one. I might end up painting some copies of this bust in the future, and I'll do some stubble, and maybe I'll just do that part on stream and show you how to do that. But I'm not going to do it for this paint along. The other thing is none of these two pictures of him have it, but if you're familiar with the movie, you know that during some of the critical scenes, the Celtic warrior guys had blue war paint on their face. And so what I might do is once the entire pair of busts is done, I might then go back and paint one or two of them with the blue war paint on their face, and we'll see how that turns out, and we'll learn the technique for that. But for the first thing up, I'm going to just basically try to replicate this paint job for you and with you. Anyway, so he's all done. There's the back side with his sword. One thing with the sword, there was a couple reference pictures of his sword from the movie, or at least one of the costume swords, where the hilt was steel instead of the bronze type color. However, I actually own one of these Claymore swords, and mine has a brass, bronze, whatever, hilt and pommel. And so I just went ahead and painted it similar to what mine looks like, because I had the visual reference right in front of me for the whole sword. So that's why I chose those colors. I think they also really look good with the brown and the green. So yeah, so there is one of the two. Celtic gorilla bust. I like it. This is where I'm at with the other character. Basically, the two things I have left to do, I have to do the axe and I have to do his hair. Got a couple of reference pictures for him. I had a harder time getting still pictures off the internet of his character that were really good. So there's one. You can see that the sculptor took some license with his axe, because his axe does not have all of that detail on it. It's really just a flat blade, but that's okay. So we've got that reference picture that we'll use, and we've also got this reference picture. We can get a little bit of some of what the ties are that are in his hair. This picture kind of shows those. There was another picture I saw that one of those ties was blue. So we might do that with one of the ties as well. But those are reference pictures. We'll pop those up as needed. And again, I'll finish this guy up over the next couple weeks. So before we get to the hair and the axe, we'll have a good sample of what that should look like. If you hopefully you watched the session 0 prior to watching this first live stream and got your busts to the point that we need to start today. So that's just a base color of cleaned, primed, and a base coat of the flesh down. If you remember, I showed you on a couple of these busts how to do the eyes prior to painting the rest of the face. So we did that on a couple of the busts, and then some of the busts I will show you going back and doing the eyes later, if that's more your thing. So I'll do that on Hamish here. So Mr. Heath, are you getting a lot of good, you enjoying the World Cup? I'm pretty sure I remember you being a big soccer fan, right? So right off the bat, if you know me, you know that at least currently, my favorite paints to use are the scale color paints. So for the most part, there's Scale 75 makes several paints. So we're going to use paints from 3 of their different lines. So Scale Color, Scale Fantasy and Games, and the I always want to say Warfront, Warfront, the Warfront paints. The Warfront paints and the Scale Color paints are similar. They kind of have a matte finish. The Fantasy and Games have a more satiny finish and are a little bit brighter in tone. But I really like these paints. You do not need to use the same paints as me. You can use all the same techniques with other brands of paints. Now, it is true that certain brands of paints are designed for different painting styles. That doesn't mean you can't use them for other painting styles, but sometimes just little things like the consistency from the bottle or the finish that they use, just different things, different aspects of the paint are intended for or made for painters who are using a special technique. Again, that doesn't mean they don't use for other techniques. Scale color is good for, or they were made for painters who tend to like to paint with midtones, do glazing, do shading after you do the midtones and the highlights and things like that. So that's kind of their cup of tea, and that's one of the reasons I like them. And some of the techniques that I use are because of that I like the scale color paints, and they work really well for these techniques. P3 paints, if you know the P3 painters, they use the 2-brush blending technique for their studio paint. So their paint is designed to be really good for 2-brush blending. Games Workshop does the base coat, highlight, wash, dry brush, all of those kinds of things. So their paints are designed to be really good with those techniques. Again, you can use these for anything, but you might find there's just a slight difference in how your paints behave, even when you've done the same consistency as mine, and that's okay. The other thing is colors, and I'll try to be really careful to show you each of the colors in addition to telling you the names of them in the scale color line that I'm using, so you can get something that's close in whatever paint line. That being said, feel free to vary up what colors you're using. You don't have to create something that's a complete carbon copy of mine. Basically, it's your model. Do what you want. Choose the colors that you like. Choose the colors you have on hand. Practice. If there's something that I'm doing and you get to a point where you really like the model and then I keep doing other stuff to it, you don't have to follow along with me. Do what makes you happy. Feel free to ask questions as we go, as I've said before. And let's just have a good time with this. I think it's going to be fun. All right, I'm going to stop with my intro. I think everybody who wants to be here is here. So we base coated the busts, or at least I base coated my busts with basic flesh. So this was the color. So as for my first layers, I'm going to start building up the highlight regions, so the lighter color regions. I'm going to use a mix of basic flesh, and I'm going to add to that a little bit of light skin and a little bit of golden skin. You don't have to mix two different lighter flesh colors, just use whatever you want. I like the light skin. It works really well with the basic flesh. They're both a little more muted in terms of, like, they're kind of a little bit desaturated skin tones, whereas the golden skin, if you can see, it's a little bit more like bright. I think it might have a little more like orange or pink in it. And so one of the things that I like is kind of the mixture of the three colors, because putting in the light skin will start to lighten that basic flesh, and putting in the golden skin, wait a second, that came out with a lot of just acrylic and goop. Using the golden skin will start to bring a little bit more color into the flesh. So mix it really well. I think the consistency is pretty good. So this is my layer consistency. If you've looked at my written tutorials, which, by the way, if you didn't see, I added a downloads link on my website. If you go to the website grilledwithbrush.com, if you go to the top, on most web browsers, depending on your settings, there's like a little button that says more, because it's one of the later tabs. So it doesn't always show up at the top. You have to click more. There's a page that says downloads. You can actually download the PDF versions of the recent Atlantis Miniatures tutorials that I finished. So the Scribe and the Troll Slayer. So free to download, have at it. Please feel free to use them, share them. They're there for you, for your own review, and hopefully they help you out with, learning some new things. But this layer consistency soaks into the paper towel pretty easily. Doesn't really sit on the top, but it also just doesn't flare out. You'll see when we start doing glazing, I'll tap the paper towel and it'll just absorb instantly and spread way out. So you don't want that consistency quite yet. You want it thin, but not too thin right now. Hey, thanks for stopping by, Mr. Heath. Now that's dedication, man. That is dedication. Are you there by yourself, or is your significant other, kids sitting around and you're just ignoring them while you watch me paint? Sorry, this is my lunch. Protein shake blended up with some banana and berries. Said it was a busy weekend. I just got home and I had to reset up my paint station after having company in town for the weekend, so barely got everything ready in time. All right, so what we're going to do is, as I paint this, I'm going to move my brush in the direction of the lightest parts. So again, if you look at those written tutorials or you've watched me paint before, so since I'm applying a lighter paint, I'm going to pull my brush towards the lighter sections. So where the light's going to hit, I'm going to move my brush strokes to pull in that direction. I mean, for the most part. Sometimes it gets tricky. But for the most part. I'll also say that I normally try to stream about 2 hours when I paint. So on these Sunday painting days, more or less that's probably what you can expect. However, I'm also planning to make sure that we try to finish at a good stopping point each time. So if that means we stream a little longer, if we stream a little less, basically once we finish a region, I suspect it'll probably be on average a little bit longer than 2 hours, but I want to try to make sure we get regions of the model done as we paint. So today, at the very least, we will get all of the highlighting done on the face. Whether we get to the glazing and shading, I'll see what time it is once we get all the highlights in. Oh, there was one more thing I was going to talk about in the opening. You probably saw that I had some dice bags made a few weeks ago, and it was really cool. We sold all 8 of the dice bags I had made. In fact, they were all sold before I even received the shipment of them, and we sold all 8 of them before the shipment even arrived, and raised 100% of the purchase price went to charity. So we raised $300 for some local animal charities, the Arizona Animal Welfare League, which is Arizona's largest no-kill shelter, and they do some other things in the community as well. And then the Arizona Pet Project, which helps to keep animals out of the shelters in the first place. Keep them in their homes, spay and neuter, things like that. So because they were quite popular, and because all of them ended up selling and I didn't even get to keep one myself, I ended up placing a second order of them. So if all goes well, those will get shipped to me this coming week. So I should get them by the end of this week or early next week. So if you missed out on getting one of those dice bags, this run will be exactly the same in the sense that 100% of the purchase price for those bags is going to go to charity. So if you're interested, please message me. You can go to my website. There's a contact form there. Go on social media, any of my social media accounts, contact me, send me a message. My email is alan@gorillawithabrush.com, ALAN. So you can email me there. Let me know if you're interested. Or if you know somebody you think might be interested, let them know. So we should have another 8 coming. I would really like to keep one this time. I have 1 for sure spoken for, so there should be at least 6 more dice bags that are unspoken for at the moment. No idea how long they'll last, so if you're thinking about it, don't wait too long. They sold fast last time. for this next layer, I'm going to add a little bit more of the light skin, a little bit more of the golden skin. Cool. Look forward to seeing you back, Suliko. So I'm just going to keep working on the highlights. Follow what I did before, leave a little bit of the previous layer showing. Now this recipe for skin is basically the same recipe that I used for all of the dwarfs that I painted recently. The only difference is that if you go and look at those dwarfs, some of them have a little bit different tone to their skin. Some is more pink, some is a little more neutral, some have a little bit more greenish brown undertone to them. All of that is done at the glazing and shading stage. So this same basic skin recipe is what I use for all of my Caucasian skin. The only thing I vary is my glaze recipe. But we'll talk more about that when we get to it. All right, at this point, after a couple layers of that, you're getting close to what just the color of light skin plus golden skin is when you put it together. And if you just keep adding more light skin and golden skin, you're almost going to see no difference between the layers. In general, kind of a rule of thumb is the more subtle you want the transitions, the more layers you do, thinner paint, more layers, more subtle transition between the colors. So, we could add a little bit more light skin, a little bit more golden skin, and keep going for more subtle transitions. The nice thing about using glazing and shading techniques are those extra layers of paint we add later are going to help to smooth out our transitions. So we don't have to make them quite as fine as if we were doing, say, like non-metallic metal blends or something like that, because we're going to shade the entire skin region or glaze over the entire skin region and do some shading on it. So we don't have to be quite as smooth with our blends. But regardless, we're getting close to what those two colors would be together. So I'm going to start adding pale skin instead of the others. Pale skin is just an extremely light skin color. It's like an off-white, but it's a little more pinkish. Just a hint of pink to it. If you don't have a color that's quite like that, you can even just use an off-white cream color. You could even add a little bit of white if you had to. Again, this flesh is going to start to get really desaturated and like fake looking, but that's okay. The tone and the richness in the skin is going to come back in when we do the glazing. We don't really need it to be in our layers here. Also, if you're curious what I'm using, this is a size 1 brush. This is from Raphael. This is the Raphael 8404 Kolinsky Sable brush. I really, really like the Raphael brushes and the Winsor & Newton 7 series brushes. My preferences are the Raphael brushes for size 1 and 2 for sure. The size 0 are good too. And the Winsor & Newton for super detail brushes like 000s, 00s, things like that. So I tend to like here's my 000. This is a Winsor & Newton Series 7 000. This is kind of my go-to detail brush. The Raphael 8404 size 1, like this is my kind of go-to size 1 brush. I find it hard to put into words exactly why. It's just more feel. As I use the brushes, they just feel right. I think maybe it might be kind of accurate to say that the Raphael brushes are a little springier in their size 1 and 2, a little softer. Which is really good for what I normally use size 1 brushes for. My detail work, I kind of want a little bit more firmness in my bristles. So that might be it. But I find it kind of hard to express why. Basically, our flesh process is going to go in maybe 4 steps, you'd say. So the first step is to do the priming and the base coating. And the second step is what we're doing here with the layering. Starting to build up some layers and textures and transitioning up into highlight regions, things like that. The second phase is going to be the glazing and the shading, which is going to add the richness and the tone to the flesh colors. And that's also where you can create a little bit of variety from one model to the next by varying that recipe a little bit. And then the final step is to go back in and very, very lightly reestablish a few of the brightest highlights on the skin. I tend to not go super crazy with this. I mean, human skin is really highly reflective. If you look right now, you look at my forehead, like there is a really, really bright, almost white, shiny spot on my forehead. So you could really go to town and create some extreme reflection points on human skin, and you could make it look really natural. A lot of painters don't go that far with their human skin, and so sometimes it almost, even if it looks correct, it almost looks like you're trying to paint the skin to be like metallic reflection, as like if you would maybe do for non-metallic metal or something. So some people might think it looks odd. I tend to not go super bright with the reflections, like you can see on the William Wallace bust. There's not a super duper bright reflection point. Of course, he's Scottish. Scottish weather is often not sunny, so hey, it's a cloudy day. There's no bright reflection. There's more scattered light. That works as well. He doesn't have a spotlight shining on his head to create the. Did I finish him? I think so. Some cat hair. Can't get away from it. I got 2 black cats. Their hair is everywhere in this house. The other thing we don't have to worry too much about, each of these sculpts has some nice wrinkling in their foreheads. Most of the color that's going to come in those wrinkles, get them a little bit deeper color, create essentially some shadows in them. It's all going to get taken care of later with our glazes and shades, so we don't have to worry about that too much right now. All right, add more light skin. Hope everybody's doing well out there. It's been super hot here the last few days, which it tends to get in Arizona in the summer. But it's been hot. You can already see we're starting to get a very, very desaturated, dead zombie kind of look to the skin, but just bear with me. It's all going to turn out good. This guy had the same dead zombie look to him too, so we'll get there. More cat hair. Just appears out of nowhere. Sometimes I find as I'm working on building the layer up that one of two things might have happened. One is that I accidentally sort of covered up the entirety of the layer that I just painted, or just by moving my brush around, I created a little bit of a rough edge where the paint's a little thicker at the transition point, which you don't really want because that's gonna mess up the transition from the lighter color into the darker color, or vice versa. So you can just get a little paint on your brush and just kind of work along. Probably tap your paper towel first so you're not too much, but and then just kind of work that edge a little bit. It smooths out that blend. And a little bit more. This time what I'm going to do, so I'm going to put some pale skin into my well, and I'm going to take some of this other paint because I really want this to start getting more light. And it takes a whole lot more of the light paint added into the mix we already have to get the color I want than to do it the reverse way. That's another good reason, though, why you should make sure your brush strokes are going towards the highlight point. You don't want those hard edges to develop along the transition area, which when you do your brush strokes the other way, pushes the paint towards that end of your brush stroke. It can create a harsher, like a thicker line there than what you really want. All right, and I'm going to do one final pass using just pale skin. I think I might have missed his neck. Can't remember. Let's do a neck pass. I really want to focus this on the places where you're going to get the most light. So top of the cheekbones, the nose, forehead. All right. We have a couple of corpses of Celtic warriors here. Dead and lifeless. Since this is the last of the highlight layers I'm really putting on, I want to make sure that the final bright areas have a good, some decent coverage. It doesn't look too patchy. So I'm just gonna hit a couple spots a second time. So I'm just getting the paint out of my dry palette. A couple reasons. One is that even if I don't end up using that well again, it's way easier to scrub out later when I wash this thing for real. But also, the first couple times I do this on a clean palette, I can reuse the well, which cuts down on the amount of time I have to spend cleaning them, which is nice. All right, now we're going to switch over to paint with a little bit of a pink undertone to it. So this is Scale Colors Pink Flesh. But any of the paints, any flesh paints that you have that have a pink undertone to, I don't think I have any from another manufacturer. I was going to see what else I could recommend, but yeah, you want one that has a little bit of a slightly pink color to it. If you don't have something like this, you could always take one of your more neutral skin tones and add just a little bit of touch of a red color to it. My suggestion would be to use a more dark red, something like whatever's equivalent to the old scab red in the Citadel paint line. Something dark, go a darker red. Probably better than a lighter red. So get a little bit in our palette. And this is going to be a glaze, so it's going to go pretty thin. This should be good. So in terms of consistency, it might be hard to see on the white, but it's very thin. It doesn't cover like the layers did. Also, when I put it on the paper towel, put more in, you can see how it reacts. It soaks in really, really quickly and spreads out to be quite a bit larger than where I tapped. Whereas the layer paint soaked in pretty quickly but stayed about the same size as the drop that I put on there. Didn't really spread out. So kind of give you an idea of what that's going to look like. Now I'm going to do both of these guys with the same color, but if you wanted to have not such a reddish undertone, so like for example, like this guy has ended up with kind of a reddish undertone to his skin, which matches what most of the photographs of this actor looks like. He's got a little bit more reddish tone to his skin. If you want something a little bit less red, what you can do is with this mix, so mix pink flesh and a little bit of basic flesh. It'll knock down the pinkness, and so you'll still get a lot of the same effects, but it won't go so red. You can also do something like use like a color like this, which is really going to start to pull your skin tones more to a gray or a greenish brown color, which can also be good depending on what kind of skin tone you're actually looking for, depending on the lighting you want lighting effect, depending on what other colors you want to use with the model and what you think are going to look good. Really just play around with different glaze recipes here. Because you're adding them one very thin layer at a time, it's just going to slowly tint the model. And so you could even try what happens if I use a couple coats of one and then maybe I add a little bit to the second or to the third or fourth coats of the glaze. What would happen? Or what happens if I take my base color and add a little blue to it and use that as my glaze color. Just play around with different colors and see what the effects are. That's the only way you're really going to figure out what might look really cool or natural or just have a neat effect to it. So I load my brush and I tap the paper towel, and I'm going to go over the entire face. Now in this one, my paintbrush strokes are going to go in the opposite direction to what they were going before. So even though this is a glaze where everything's getting covered, it's not just a shade where I'm just going into the recesses, I'm still going to be treating this like a shade in the sense of how my brush strokes go. So they're going to tend to go in towards the nose and out towards the edge of the face. It's okay if you get this all into the hair. We haven't painted the hair yet. What I found as I was doing the sample models for this, one of the trickiest parts was on the neck here, because I can't move my paintbrush towards the back of the neck. There's too much hair and other stuff that's in the way, so I was having a hard time getting the shading to be kind of right back in those corners, but do your best. So move the brush towards the back of the neck, up underneath his chin, down towards the shirt. Hey, welcome back. Since I'm going to be doing several coats of this, while I build up the colors here, maybe I'll tell you guys some stories. Be story time. So one of the reasons when I saw the masters for these busts, why I really wanted them and why I ended up ultimately deciding to cast them and have them available so I could paint multiple copies of them, so other people could buy them and paint them. Like Braveheart was a big deal for me growing up. Well, at a certain point. I wasn't super young when it came out. But when it came out the first time, it wasn't even actually really on my radar. I didn't know what the movie was. I didn't have a desire to see it. Like it just kind of was completely off my radar. So it came out in the theaters. And then it got nominated for a bunch of awards, like Academy Awards and stuff. And so they ended up re-releasing it in the theaters. And it was around that time that my friend had heard about it and said, we really ought to see this movie. I think it's really cool. Again, I hadn't heard anything about the movie before. I didn't know what it was about or anything. Went and saw the movie. We had no clue that it was a 3-hour movie. We actually were supposed to be somewhere about 2 to 2.5 hours after the airtime. And so we ended up being an hour late to where we were supposed to be heading afterwards. But the movie just blew me away. Like it was so good. I loved every second of it. I ended up going, for the time it was re-released in the theaters, so it was re-released for a month or two. So I ended up going 7 times to see it in the theater, and in the 2-week span. Most of those with the same person. We just kept going back and seeing it again and again. And when it came out on VHS or DVD or whatever, I don't know if DVDs were even around at that time. Probably not. Probably came out on VHS. I got it. I just kept watching it. Like it was a very powerful movie to me. In 2001, I want to say, 98, 99, might have been 2002. I think it was 2002. I had an opportunity to, well, even when his love died, I'm ruthless, that I loved every minute of the movie. Well, I obviously didn't love when she died, but I thought it was beautifully shot and powerful. I just loved everything about the movie in the appropriate ways. So obviously then when I saw these busts, it was a big deal for me. But one of the things that is a little bit unfortunate is, so in 2002, I had an opportunity through the university I was at the time to do a study abroad program. And so I studied abroad in the UK. And I was actually able to go to Stirling, which is where many of the battles that are in the movie and obviously in real history took place. And it's a little disappointing because many of the battles do not. Oh yeah, the soundtrack is fantastic. I still to this day listen to that soundtrack. But yeah, a lot of the things in the movie, go figure, Hollywood, right? A lot of the things in the movie are, a little inaccurate, and even beyond things like there was no way that there could have been an affair between William Wallace and the princess because they weren't even around at the same time. But even forgiving that kind of stuff, just stuff like that first battle where they used the spears against the English cavalry. That battle was the Battle of Stirling Bridge. It was being fought over a bridge, and in the movie there is no bridge. And the fact that there was a bridge was really important, not just to the tactics in the battle, but also why they were fighting at that location. And it was one of those things where I felt like man, the movie, the people who made this movie had this amazing historical content that they could have used, and they instead chose to do something else. And I'm sure there were budget reasons, and I'm sure there were reasons that they had for the choices that they made. But I don't know, I just felt a little let down about a lot of the things that I found out. And it was also kind of funny that some of the local people were a little bit upset, but I don't know how real the upset was. I think it might have been sort of feigned, good-humored upsetness. But the legends of William Wallace is that he was a super-duper tall, almost a giant of a man. They joke in the movie about, William Wallace is 7 feet tall. No, you can't be him. And he's and he kind of acknowledges that, oh yeah, the rumor is bigger than the man. But, those are the legends, were that he was a really tall, really large, powerful warrior. And Mel Gibson is not only is he not Scottish, he's Australian, but he is a rather short individual and fairly small. And so I remember a tour guide there in Stirling talking about how they got a Scottish dwarf to play, they got an Australian dwarf to play a Scottish giant. Anyway, so that disappointed me. It killed the movie for me for a little bit. I admit I finally was able to get over that and go back and love the movie again, but it broke my heart a little bit to find out some of those inaccuracies. Fast forward a couple years to 2004. My wife and I were getting married, and she wanted to go out of the country for our honeymoon. And while I was studying abroad, it was a kind of a cool program, because what we did was we got to go with our own professors, so people who were from the university, and so we were able to have classes wherever we were at. So we would just, we all had apartments and things in the different locations. So we were stationed some of the time in London, some of the time in Edinburgh, and some of the time in Dublin. And we would have classes 4 days a week, just in either classrooms in local schools we were able to rent while we were there, or even in London when we had larger flats, we would just all gather in one of the living rooms in one of the flats and have these 2-hour classes. So you'd have 2-hour classes maybe 3-hour classes. So like Monday, Wednesday, you'd have one of your classes. You take 2 classes. Monday, Wednesday, you have one of them. Tuesday, Thursday, you have the other one. In the later afternoons, they would set up special tours of things that were in that location, historical things or things related to the classes you were taking. You'd do homework in the evenings, and then the weekends were yours. So you'd be able to spend the 3-day weekends just kind of doing whatever you want to do, sightsee or stuff like that. Well, happened to be that while we were in Scotland, while I did manage to go to Stirling, and I went to Dunkeld Burnham, Burnham Wood, famous from Macbeth. I was able to go to those places. I didn't really get to go to the Highlands, nor did I get to spend as much time as I wanted to. So we were in Scotland for the least amount of time. In addition to that, that was also the middle of the trip. So the midterms and some of the assignments that we had were due then. And so while we were in Scotland, I was having to do more homework than I would have wanted to. So I offered that we go back to Scotland, or we go to Scotland for our honeymoon. And she thought that was a fantastic idea. So we went back to Scotland, and I'll tell you I'll tell you a later part of the story first, just because it has to still do with Stirling. So we went back to Stirling again. Went to the William Wallace Monument. They had since erected a statue where the William Wallace likeness looked exactly like Mel Gibson, and it was erected and put in place at the base of the hill where William Wallace Monument is. But that was also where the Scottish clans were at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. They were hiding up in the hills, or waiting up in the hills to hide their numbers. As the English started to cross the bridge, they charged down the hills, out of the forest. Anyway, so at that location, they've put this statue. But again, it looks like Mel Gibson. And the tour guide this time, so after he had claimed that when that was put up, that same day there was a minor earthquake that caused boulders to crash down that hill, and that the spirit of William Wallace was a little bit angry at having a statue of Mel Gibson at the base of his hill and his monument. But they have there at the Wallace Monument, they have what they claim is his sword, which is, I think, one of the reasons why he has this legend of being such a large person, because it's a gigantic 2-handed claymore. So again, supposedly his sword. However, it looked to be in pretty good shape to me. I have a feeling that it's probably not really his sword, but you never know. So anyway, a different part of the story. One of the really cool places that we loved was a little town called Stonehaven that's a little outside of Aberdeen on the east coast of Scotland. Maybe an hour and a half train ride north of Edinburgh. And it was such a weird coincidence because... So we got there, we found a bed and breakfast right on the bay, got checked in, and then we wanted to kind of walk down the beach, walk and find some place to eat. And so we're walking, I had my little tour guide book, and I was trying to find in the tour guide book some place that was recommended to eat. So my head was down, we were kind of walking, and this guy stops us and it's like, "Oh, are you new to town? You visiting?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're looking for some place to eat." And he says, "Oh, I can tell by your accents that you're from America." And we're like, "Yeah." And he goes, "I have a daughter that lives in America." We're like, "Oh, that's interesting. Where does she live?" He goes, "Scottsdale, Arizona." Well, we live in at the time we lived in Queen Creek, Arizona. Now we're in Gilbert, Arizona. But we are, part of the same metropolitan region where Scottsdale is located. It's like, this is really odd. What's the odds that you meet a Scottish person whose daughter lives in a town right by where you live? He says, and in fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was visiting her and I was in Scottsdale. This is crazy. And we just start talking to him, and he asked us if we had seen the movie Braveheart, and of course I chime in, absolutely, I love that movie. And he says, you know that battle scene where all of the Scottish people moon the English army? It's like, oh yeah, that's hilarious. They're lifting up their kilts and they are mooning them and smacking their butts and stuff like that. He says, well, they hired a whole bunch of locals from this region to be extras in the movie for various scenes, but in particular that one. It's like, really? He's like, yeah, I'm in the second row, he said, something like 4 people to the left or to the right of Mel Gibson as they're standing there in line and mooning everybody. It's like, so my butt is on the screen during that scene. It was just so funny. So we just kept talking to him for a little bit because he was just a riot and so fun to talk to. And then finally we were just kind of like, okay, well, we're going to go get something to eat. Where do you recommend? I'm just adding a little bit of this Indian shadow. It's kind of a really dark red, slightly purplish, little bit of muted. He says, well, there's a little cafe over there. If you just keep walking along the beach here, you'll run into it. Here's the name of it. Food is not too expensive. It's decent. This is where I recommend that you go. Well, sounds good to us. So we went over there and we walk in the door, and they were playing our song that we did our first dance to at our wedding just, the week before. It was just this really odd, crazy set of coincidences in this little town that we just absolutely fell in love with and would love to go back to someday. But yeah, Stonehaven was so cool. And in another Mel Gibson connection, which I think is as I'm thinking about it now, I think I recall this is why he had wanted, because Mel Gibson directed Braveheart in addition to acting in it. One of the reasons he wanted to hire people from the Stonehaven, Aberdeen region as extras for Braveheart was because he had been in that city before. So just outside of Stonehaven is Dunatar Castle. Dunatar Castle is this castle that's out. You should Google it and look at pictures of it because it's a really, really cool place. But it's built on this piece of land that kind of juts out into the North Sea. So it's a really well-protected fortress. Quite a bit of it's in ruins now, but still a very impressive castle to see. And in those ruins at Dunatar Castle is where a lot of the castle scenes were shot for the Mel Gibson version of Hamlet that was filmed and released, I think sometime in the 90s. So he had been to that region before and liked the people there. And so then when it came to hiring extras, it's one of the reasons he wanted to bring people from that region and be in his movie. But anyway, that castle is amazing. We walked out to it from where we were staying after we ate our dinner, and we walked out to the castle. a bunch of cool pictures. So I want to do a little bit more glazing in the over the lighter regions, just to continue to add a little more color to them. But I want to be really careful because it's starting to get to be a darker color. And I don't want to go overboard, so I mixed up a thinner version of it. I saw a message that says, "Don't hate me." I think somebody's working on something different, which is fine. I'll read the message in a second and respond. Don't hate me. I'm actually painting up some Guild Ball models right now with an airbrush. Don't really use an airbrush, so it's a bit of testing ground. Haven't quite got the bust ready. Need to get these out the door. That's fine, man. You do what you got to do. The nice thing is these videos are going to be saved forever, so come back and watch them at your leisure. In fact, you might even prefer to watch them later. You can fast forward, rewind. It's probably better for doing the painting anyway. Be able to pause the video, work out some stuff. No worries. One thing I want to be sure to do is make sure to get some of this red shade starting to appear around the eyes, because really, the area around a person's eyes tends to be more shadowed by their brow. Also, you tend to just get a little bit more color in there than on, say, like the cheekbones. One trick, by the way, you'll see some people do. I do it every so often if I think the area is going to be a little tough to shade. But sometimes what you'll see people do is dip their paintbrush in water, get most of the water off, but then just paint the area they're about to paint, but just with water. And then when they get the paint itself and they put it on, it's already sort of more viscous, and they can really push it around a little bit better. Push it where it wants to go. I tend to kind of almost do it a little bit backwards to that, where I start putting the paint on, and then if it feels like it's not quite behaving like I want, or it's creating too much of a harsh line or something like that, then I'll get a little bit of water, wet the paint a little more, and start pushing it around. So even after everything goes to heck, I'll still be able to watch. You mean even after I mess up my own busts, or you mess up your busts, or what are you? Or your airbrush explodes and all your Guild Ball models are toast? By the way, hopefully you can start to see that face that looked really dead and lifeless is really starting to come alive with some tone and richness into the skin. Still a ways to go, but getting there. You said the tutorials. Oh, I see. Yeah, they'll be. Yep. The sun will consume the earth, but the tutorials will live on. Let that try a second. Kind of do a quick comparison of how we're doing. You can see we still need to deepen the shadows a little bit. A little bit more red into the face, especially those shaded areas. But we're getting there. Now you can make all this happen much quicker. You can use thicker paint, fewer passes, but you're just not going to get quite the same level of subtlety, and you certainly don't have the same level of control as doing multiple thin passes. Multiple thin passes, you just keep building up until you're totally happy with how it looks. It's hard to go too far because each layer is so subtle. That even if you say, oh, I think I've got it, but maybe just one more layer, you know, that doing one more layer is probably not going to mess anything up. Again, just a reminder, note that I'm moving my paintbrush towards the shadow regions, towards where I want the darker color, away from the highlights. after this pass, I'm going to darken the color a little bit. So a little bit more Indian shadow. Sometimes as I add darker color to a glaze / shade color like this, a little goes a very long way. A little bit of this is going to darken it quite a bit. And so if you start just squirting paint into your glaze, it's sometimes hard to judge just how much darker you're about to make this, because you have to remember that most of this is water. So a little bit of pigment in terms of a ratio is actually quite a bit of a change for the paint that you have in there. So if you put a little bit on your palette and then get just a little bit on your brush, you have a little bit more control over how dark the paint gets. And I always feel like it's better to have less drastic transitions, a few more coats. More control you have, the better in terms of how good the final product is going to come out. this point too, I'm adding a little bit extra. Sorry, I'm having bad allergies this week. A little extra attention to the lips. A few passes of the increasingly reddish / purple glaze there. Actually give the lips a pretty nice natural tone without having to go back and paint them and make it potentially look like he's wearing lipstick. All right, a little bit more. Most important things with the glazing and shading steps is just to have patience. Go slow. It'll often be tempting to try to push too far too fast. Just take it slow. Mix your paint if it starts to feel like it's separating on you. It's definitely starting to separate near the end of that second bust. Some weird things start to happen when you paint with paint that starts to separate. You can end up with weird, like chalky type finishes and residues and stuff places. Certainly the color is going to be less even. That is my cat, if you can hear him. I think he just woke up from a nap and decided he's hungry. One thing I liked about this particular recipe, and using the Indian shadow to increasingly add in, the Indian shadow has a little bit of blue in it. It's kind of a more purpley undertone, which is nice because it starts to push the shadows a little bit cooler color. Which, you know, if you have warmer raised areas, cooler shadows help to complement that quite well. Getting pretty close. All right, so I was just double checking, just kind of comparing the two busts. The shadows are pretty similar. Difference is that the model that's done has a little bit more brightness to the highlight areas. And so that's going to be the fourth, the fourth stage, where we're going to go back and reinforce some of those highlight areas. And then that'll be the last thing that we do today. And that'll get the flesh mostly done. Now there's always a chance that once we start filling out some more of the model, that we might find that there's a little bit of problem with the face, like we need a little bit different tone in it, we need some brighter highlights, we need some deeper shadows, something might not be right about it, and we can definitely touch that up as we go. But for the time being, I'm going to give it a little bit of reestablishing some of those highlights and call it good. So going back to the pale skin, but this time I want it to be pretty thin, almost like a glaze, maybe just a touch thicker than what you might do a glaze at, but pretty thin. So load my brush, tap the paper towel. Again, moving my brush in the direction of the highlights. Might actually switch to a thinner brush here in a second. Just do a couple passes of this until you think it looks right. Again, this is pretty thin paint, so it's not, it's not going on like if you were freehanding details or anything like that. You definitely want it to be more like a glaze, just subtly changing the color of the region over several passes. Just thickening it up just a little bit. So because the hair is not painted, and because the eyes need some touching up, and the eyebrows are not done, it's a little bit wonky. Looks a little bit wonky. The other thing too is that I might do there's a little bit of tonal difference, and I definitely like how this one has come out better so far. And so what I might end up doing is going back with, say, like light skin, or one of them that has a little bit less pink in it, and do a little bit of glazing to touch up some of the tones so that some of these areas don't look quite as pink, and get the tones to match up a little bit better, smooth some things out. Again, it's one of those things where you stop when you're happy. I tend to be a fiddler. Paint something and then I just go back and fiddle with it. Until it's perfect. I'm kind of a perfectionist about some stuff related to my painting, and so by the way, your my paper towel starts to look pretty crazy after a session of doing glazing. You're tapping it so much, getting so much color off of it. So I'm treating this a little bit more like a highlight pass, in the sense that I'm sweeping from the shadow areas out to the highlight areas. I don't want to go all the way into the shadows. Working out from kind of where the shadows start. I'm actually pretty happy with Hamish. He's pretty similar. Again, it's kind of hard to see because of all the details haven't all been finished off yet. I'm fairly happy where he's at the moment. Might need a little tweaking as we paint some other parts of the model. Still think I need a couple passes on Wallace. I'm going to do one more pass of this. I'm going to call that good for now. And I will do one last little thing. I'm going to touch up around his eyes real quick. Just so we can start to see the full effect. Okay, we'll call that good for now. The camera is distorting the color a little bit. He doesn't look quite as like white as he does in that picture. That's bizarre. Two actually look quite similar, but on the camera they don't. Might try to mess with the white balance for next time. See if we can start off with a little bit more accurate coloring on him. So I'm using that Indian shadow. This is for the line, the outline of the eyes. Sorry, splashed myself. This will help give the eyes a little bit more definition. All right. And I think it's odd that can't quite get the color to look right on the camera. Well, like I said, I'll have to mess with the white balance a little bit next time. Brightness down helps a little bit too. Oh well. It's just a cheap web camera, so you can't get it too good. Anyway, so that is session 1. So that shows you the basic idea about how we're going to get the the rich, realistic flesh tones, at least as they look in real life and not necessarily on a web camera. Just to recap the really important steps that we did, it was kind of a 4-step process. So after priming, so we used the base coat, built up through the layers of going with lighter and lighter flesh tones to start to accent the highlighted areas on the face, build up some kind of transitions from the mid-tone up to those highlight areas. We used glazes with a pinkish flesh color to start to give some life to that flesh, give a little bit of color into it. Made several passes on that, making sure to move our brush towards the recessed areas so that we didn't end up with some of that area pooling in next to the highlights, which is not really what we want. Continue to add some darker color, some kind of purplish red to it, to give us a little bit of a cooler color and a little bit darker color to start accenting the highlights. Accenting the shaded areas of the face. Went back in and reestablished a few of the highlights. I changed the tone on the paint a little bit. It was just a hair off to me. So I used some color that was one of our, a mix of some of the colors we were using in our, actually it's pretty close to the first layer color. It was a mix of the basic flesh, the golden skin, and the light skin to do some glazing to restore a little bit more, like knock down the pink a little bit, but also give a little bit life back to some of those reinforced highlight areas. So anyway, so that is all of session 1. In session 2, what I plan to do is to work on the tartan area. So that was the second part that I painted on these guys. I think that's the next best spot to work. So yeah, so we're going to learn how to do the tartan in session 2. So I hope you join me. If you were catching this and you don't have your own busts, again, you can go to gorillawithbrush.com. You can order your own pair of the Celtic busts and paint along with me. You can also just paint whatever you want and try to use these techniques and try to learn some of the things that I do. But until next week, I hope that you have a good one and keep painting. Take care, guys.